it's important that people are willing to go there and not be afraid that emotions are these dangerous things, right? Like our emotions are so adaptive and they evolved for a reason to help us navigate the world. They tell us when something is right and when something is wrong. But yeah, I definitely understand that, particularly in kids who are strongly feeling kids who have maybe gotten in trouble for being strongly feeling kids, they sometimes just want to suppress and not talk about emotions at all.
I am so excited for today's episode because we are diving into the science behind something that every parent deals with on a daily basis: big emotions. Joining me is Dr. Kristen Lindquist, a neuroscientist and psychologist at Ohio State University, whose research focuses on how we develop emotional awareness and regulation across the lifespan. From babies to adolescence, and even through adult transitions like matrescence and menopause, Kristen's work helps us understand how our brains and bodies process feelings and what actually helps us make sense of them. This conversation you're about to hear is packed with practical, science-backed insights that can really shift the way you approach emotional moments with your child. We'll talk about why trying to label your child's emotions in the middle of a meltdown might backfire, how to use play and everyday conversations to build emotional intelligence, and why the moments before and after a dysregulated episode are where the real learning happens. So whether you've got a toddler who tantrums or a sensitive big kid who shuts down, this episode will help you feel more confident and connected as you support their emotional development. Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Bren, a clinical psychologist and mom of two. In this podcast, I've taken all of my clinical experience, current research on brain science and child psychology, and the insights I've gained on my own parenting journey, and distilled everything down into easy to understand and actionable parenting insights so you can tune out the noise and tune into your own authentic parenting voice with confidence and calm. This is Securely Attached. If you're interested in learning how to strengthen your child's emotion regulation abilities, you are going to love today's Securely Attached podcast interview. But before we get into it, I wanted to let you know about a completely free guide that I created to help you build those vital emotion regulation skills through an avenue that is most impactful for learning: play. This guide is filled with playful, connection-based games for kids of all ages that are designed to support your child's developing brain and nervous system. These activities are simple, fun, and most importantly, backed by science, so they actually work, helping your child build the emotional wiring they need to be able to calm their body and grow their resilience over time. You can grab the link to download the guide right in the episode description, or head to drsarahbrand.com/games to get it sent straight to your inbox. Okay, now let's get started with this week's interview. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We have Dr. Kristen Lindquist here. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So before we hit record, I was like totally nerding out with you on some neuroscience, but you have done some incredible research on emotions and in children and adults. And I'm very curious if you could share a little bit with our audience, kind of like an overview of how you got into this type of research and what piqued your interest about the kinds of things you've studied, and what's kind of like what are like some of the highlights that have directed your research over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I sort of became an emotion scientist by accident. I thought I wanted to be a clinical psychologist, and so knew I had to get some research experience, and found a lab that was doing research on emotion. And I thought, I don't know, can you scientifically study emotion? But, sounds like it would at least be some good training prior to going into clinical psychology. And then I just fell in love with experimental psychology. And the fact that we could ask questions about the nature of people's daily lives and where they came from and how they were influenced by the worlds that we live in. I had previously also considered going into biology. And so was sort of very interested in also how it is that our brains and our peripheral bodies and sort of the physiology that underlies our body might actually contribute to those experiences. So over time, I also studied in neuroscience and physiology, and so sort of like added those tools to my toolbox for understanding what emotions are and how they function. And then more recently, I've also become interested in, not just how they sort of act as these static things in young adults once we've quote unquote developed, but, how it is that they emerge early on in infancy and really shift and change throughout all of the human lifespan. So we've really started sort of studying them from womb to tomb, as we say in the lab. So we have studies that look as young as infants in some cases, and then all the way up to 85, even older if we can recruit folks that old.
Yeah, that's so cool. Are you finding that there are like very kind of distinct developmental stages, like I'm thinking adolescence, perhaps even like matrescence, that you might be studying to see if there are, obviously early childhood would be the obvious ones too, but like that there are real kind of like peaks in changes in development of emotion and language?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems like there are some critical periods during the development of emotional processes. I mean, obviously, infancy is a huge one when the whole brain is just so rapidly developing. And early childhood is really a time when kids are sort of like gaining their emotional repertoire and their understanding and their regulatory abilities. And so that's really crucial. But yes, obviously adolescence is a huge one. The onset of puberty changes the entire neurobiology and the brain's ability to even sort of predict what's going on in the body. As you know, associated with that is the onset of all sorts of mental illnesses and mood disorders and so on, especially in girls. Not to mention all of the social things that also happen around that time that can exacerbate things. And then, excuse me, I'm also becoming really interested in sort of midlife to older age. Has long been a somewhat ignored phase of emotional life. But there's huge changes to our neurobiology as well as our social worlds again during that particular phase of life. I'm particularly really interested in perimenopause and menopause in, roughly half the population. That has long gone understudied how that impacts health and wellness. So,
oh, that's really interesting. We've actually been planning on doing a number of perimenopause related episodes. So I might have to have you come back and talk to us about some of that research, because that would be super interesting. And I'm curious too, like, does matrescence come up in your world as well? Because I feel like that is also, I feel like, and maybe it's a product of more women being in these fields and having an interest in our own development and biology and biochemistry and like actually tracking our own patterns instead of it being so male centric. But like childbearing years being an actual like developmental change in the brain, in the body. And then the sort of end of the childbearing years and it's going to that perimenopause through menopause shift again, like massive restructuring.
Yeah, I mean, in general, women's health has been so ignored, and we don't understand a lot. Although in recent years, there has been really interesting work looking at, as you said, how it is that a woman's brain is actually changing as a product of pregnancy and postpartum and so on. So that's obviously really interesting as well, and has huge shifts on people's emotional lives. But even, some of the brain structures that change in pregnancy are those that are associated with empathy and social cognition and really, like having connections with your offspring. And so it's fascinating to think about how the biology could sort of precede some of these changes in the psychology.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just, to me, I hear that as like fairly compelling indication that attachment science is so hardwired. Like we basically are, our biology just evolutionarily has adapted to shift into increased capacity for attachment connection.
Absolutely.
As we raise a child.
Yeah.
And so that.
Yeah. I mean, I think some scientists would say that was mammals' like great adaptation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we are not the only species that attaches.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very important process across multiple species. It's so interesting. So going back, I want to go back to some of like maybe more practically in day-to-day life. When you're studying, I mean, you have kids. I think you have kids.
I do have kids, yeah.
Close to the same age as my kids, actually, because my kids are 6 and 7.5.
Okay. Yep. I have an almost 6-year-old and an 8.5-year-old.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we know this firsthand, but there is like, we can get into the science and we could think about the theory, and I wouldn't mind picking your brain a little bit about like really understanding the neuroscience of their development of emotional capacity. And because I like to, if I want to know how to do something, I kind of want to know why that works.
Absolutely.
But if we're trying, I mean, how many moms are listening or parents that are listening are like, I clicked on this episode because I really want to understand how to support my child in becoming more fluent in their emotional experience so that they maybe are able to talk to me about what's upsetting them instead of, showing me by exploding it out at me in lava. Yeah. What do you find in your research has been kind of like the building blocks of that emotional regulation capacity? What helps? What's going to happen automatically? What do we need to support a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I'm super happy to get into the nitty gritty neurobiology for folks who are interested, because that the neurobiology is kind of like the hardware, right? Like it is what can the system do, but you have to sort of help with the software. And so as kids are developing, the hardware is developing, but the software actually sort of helps it along, and so we can get more into all of the nitty gritty neuroscience if you want to. But I agree, probably most parents are like, what can I do to help my kid? So as kids are developing, we have learned that their emotions go from very sort of broad to more differentiated as they are learning more about themselves, learning more about the world, and so on. And so you can think about this starting as early as being a newborn, where they are born into a world of, I think Alison Gopnik called it blooming, buzzing confusion, right? Like they have never seen the world outside, and they're seeing light and hearing noise in new ways that they didn't when they were inside the womb. I mean, they did, but it was different. And so their brain is trying to make meaning of that. It's trying to make meaning of their own internal sensations. So feeling cold or too hot or hungry or discomfort. And so they, at such an early age, are really sort of emoting to you that they feel distress or everything is copacetic, right? Like I'm cozy and fed and sleepy, things are great, or I am the opposite of those things. And as their brain is developing, it is learning to predict the meaning of its own internal states better. So, everyone with a toddler has had an experience where your kid's losing their mind and they don't realize it's because they're hungry, right? So like at some point they are learning to understand that internal sensation is hunger, but they don't quite get that right away. And parents are, very, very adept at helping with them with that, or, it's time to take a nap because you're losing it. And they don't know themselves like, oh, this is sleepiness. I should probably go and have a rest. And so there's all these ways in which the brain is really learning how to predict the meaning of its own internal sensations as they exist in the world around you. And emotions are much the same way. So, when a infant who is mobile encounters something and, can't get the toy that they want and they feel frustrated, they are learning that they can actually enact change on the world, but that sometimes they don't get what they want in return. And that's a very frustrating experience. But they don't necessarily know what that means, how to avoid it in the future, how to regulate it. And this is where parents come in and help to actually sort of shape some of the meaning and some of the reactions to those experiences. So there's a lot of evidence that parents who in that situation where the toddler is frustrated say, hey, are you feeling mad? What can we do about that? Are actually producing kids who in the long run are going to have better regulated experiences, more discrete emotional experiences, be able to tell the difference between different emotions better, and act in a more quote unquote appropriate way for the context.
Well, yeah, because what I think what ultimately ends up happening, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when the parent is helping the child name their experience, and sometimes you could do this with words, right? And I know that a lot of your research is on like actual language. So you saying, oh, you're mad. But I think you can, I would imagine, because I feel like you could do it a lot too with nonverbal cues, like, I know, like, so this, because I think also a lot of times kids, when they are really frustrated, too much words is just noise.
Yes.
And so marking that, mirroring that, and if you can put language, even better, but only if they can hear you and tolerate it.
Exactly.
What we're doing though in those moments is helping them create kind of like the way I often will describe it is like you are creating bookcases that then a child can go put a book on next time. A way to organize these experiences that the child can then kind of keep that organization and return to it on their own when you're not there.
Exactly. I love that metaphor. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. We don't always do it with explicit labeling. In fact, that would be really annoying in daily life if we just walked around, labeling everybody's feelings. But yes, there's ways in which we are engaging in nonverbals or even just, helping with the situation, coming and saying, oh, is that toy stuck? Let's get it unstuck and that will make you feel better, that you are helping to structure those bookcases, that yes, then the kid has this, cognitive repertoire that they can apply in the future. It's also the case that while in the moment it might not be helpful to use the label or, try to logic it out, you can, when the kid is calm, and developmentally appropriate, discuss the situation. So parents who discuss sort of the causes and consequences of emotions with their children a lot, again, have kids who grow up to have this really sort of rich emotional intelligence that in turn benefits their psychology and their academics and their well-being and all these positive outcomes.
Yeah, that's actually a really helpful distinction, I think. And I'm curious if there's research that says that, trying to communicate the emotion verbally to your kid in the moment versus doing it in like calm, connected later moments might be more beneficial. Are they finding that? Because I find parents, understandably, who are now inundated with a lot of these sort of parenting strategies. They're just constantly getting, and they're always sort of reduced to like a soundbite, right?
Yeah.
We're all told, you've got to validate your child's experience. You've got to validate their emotions. This is how you build emotional intelligence. And I do not disagree with that. But I think there's some nuance to it. And I think there's some timing to it that often gets lost in what parents are actually getting taught. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I have lots of thoughts on that.
Yeah, I also have lots of thoughts about more as a mom than as a scientist.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So, the research that I am referring to actually is not looking in the moment with kids. Mm-hmm. So this is research that is like using corpora of parent-directed speech or like parent-child conversation. So this is like hanging out with your kid, chatting in the car after pickup, or in the cases of some of these studies, you come into the lab and you're just having a conversation. And so it's not in the heat of the moment. It is conversing with your kid. And it's the parents who in those moments are using these sort of socio-emotional concepts and using them in a nuanced way and referring to the causes and consequences of emotion or referring to comments about internal states. So all these things that sort of like make up the feature space of what emotions are that have children who longitudinally, so, over time, go on to have kids who possess more emotion knowledge, so they can sort of repeat that back. In some ways, that's not that surprising, but good to know that they're retaining it. They are more adept at understanding emotions on other people's faces and in other people's behavior. And we have some recent evidence that for kids who have more nuanced understanding of different emotion concepts, so anger, love, sadness, disgust, etc. These kids are actually rated by their parents offline in a totally different context as having better emotion regulation, as having more sort of like situationally appropriate emotions. So they experience the right emotion in the right context. They can differentiate amongst their emotions more. So yes, it's not necessarily in the moment. And in fact, in my own experience, as a parent of a kid who has big feelings, early on, when she was younger, I would, I'd seen like the gentle parenting stuff and would be like, okay, like, let's talk about it. Why are you feeling this way? And she was like,
yes.
Worse, actually. And so I actually learned very quickly, and using some great psychology resources that, for her, actually in the heat of the moment, what was better was for her to have a timeout, not to punish, but, a timeout to calm down.
Like a break.
Yeah, let it run its course. And to this day, she can speak very articulately about what she was feeling after she's done. But in the heat of the moment, it's hard. And, it's the same for adults, right? Like there is evidence that during very high intensity emotions, even adults have a hard time differentiating what they're feeling. Or at least they are worse at it than they are when they're experiencing lower intensity emotions. So everybody experiences it.
Right. Well, because if you think about it, when we're flooded with an emotion, our prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, is offline. And if that's where we are, if that's what we use to organize our felt experience into language that makes sense to us and to someone else, we really need to have that part of our brain on. And so I think sometimes we have really unrealistic expectations of even adults, but also certainly kids, that when they are flooded with emotion, that they can hear, not only that we expect them to use their own words, that's quite a lofty expectation, but that they can even take in our words. Yeah. Like when they're 10 out of 10, it's a pretty good chance that we are noise, just stimulus noise. Absolutely. Undifferentiated, blah, 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 to them. And it can actually be, I would imagine, I've seen it with my own kids, that's actually overstimulating and adding gasoline on their fire, even if the words are intended to be validating, soothing, supportive,
Yep.
I think a lot of parents get confused by that.
Yeah.
It's perplexing in the moment. I'm trying to help you and you're screaming at me louder. I'm trying to touch you and soothe you and you're kicking at me.
Yes. And actually, what's interesting about having multiple kids is that they're totally different, right?
Totally.
Despite what the science says, everybody is so unique. And so, what I have found there, which I think, makes sense based on the science, is that different kids may need different things in that context. And so, you may want to give your kid a hug, but for them, they're like, touching me feels like fire on my skin right now. And yet, for another kid, that soothing touch may be exactly what they need. And if you were to give them a break and take away, all of their stimulation, they would be like, oh my God, this is terrible. Now you've separated me and left me by my lonesome. So I think, yes, figuring out maybe offline when you're not in the heat of the moment, like what sort of things would make it better? What very low level things would make it better?
Yeah. When I do work with parents, I do a lot of parenting support and I work with a lot of parents who have very explosive kids. And one of the things I always do with them is have them map out their child's, I call it their sort of regulation thermometer and their preferences for being regulated co-regulated within those different moments. And like when my kid is at a 5, I have, a lot of things that I can use to co-regulate with her that match her needs in that moment. When my kid is at a 7, it's much more limited. And when she's at a 10, there's probably about 1 or 2 things that I can do to support her in that moment. And mostly it's just keep her from hurting herself or somebody else or damaging something and just kind of like, let's triage and let the wave go all the way through. And then talking in that moment is bad choice on my part. It doesn't help at all.
Yes.
But that took some practice and some figuring it out. But like when I help parents kind of recognize, and you could do this with 2 kids in the same family and it will look completely different. It's completely individualized. It has to be individualized to their brain, nervous system, sensory preferences.
Exactly. Yeah. What a great tool.
Tolerance.
I laughed a little bit because when my eldest was young, I drew a very bad feeling thermometer and we used it. And then she subsequently decorated it and, like made the people on the side have like exploding. So
that's awesome. But that was done after, right? Outside.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Hey, jumping in one last time because we just talked about a lot of really useful strategies for parenting sensitive, spicy, or more explosive kids, like mapping out their regulation and knowing not just how, but when to use different tools and techniques. And if you've ever felt like you've tried everything, timeouts, scripts, deep breaths, and nothing actually helps in those heated moments, I want to tell you about Parenting by Design, my guided program for increasing behavioral and emotional regulation in sensitive kids. In this program, I will walk you through exactly how to move beyond the one-size-fits-all parenting hacks and instead customize your approach to your child's unique brain, body, and temperament, which can be a total game changer when nothing else seems to work. It's the same approach I use in my clinical work with families to help bring more calm, connection, and confidence into their homes. And now it's available for you to learn on your own schedule. You can find the link in the episode description or go to drsarahbren.com/parenting by design to join and start today. That's drsarahbren.com/parenting by design. All right, back to the episode. Another thing I will always say to people when I'm trying to describe, like, when is the best time to teach a kid not to do something destructive or help them learn more about their emotions is like, if you think about a timeline of like, an explosive event. Think about like before, during, and after. if you were to like take that line and like just turn it into a circle, like the before and the after touch, right? Like your before is right before, like all the after stuff turns into the next before the next explosion, right?
Right, exactly.
And what I often find is that parents, I think we're getting better at not doing as much intervention in the during.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think parents are very compelled to teach in the during.
Yeah.
Teaching in the during really doesn't do a whole lot of utility.
Yep.
I think parents are moving more towards teaching in the after, right? That's debriefing, right? Oh, hey, let me help you connect the dots. Let me help you make sense of why were you so mad? What happened that you got so upset that you smacked your sister? Or like, what was going on before that happened? What were you trying to do? What could you do differently? Here's where I might teach. Oh, you can totally scream that you're mad, but you can't hit.
Right.
If you feel that way and you want to hit next time, like what could you do instead? That's all after stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good. I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
But where I think is actually like the sweet spot of parenting that people totally do not appreciate and definitely under index in their parenting is the before the next explosion. Different from the after in that it's not about tying it back to this event, which can also be super triggering for kids who are very sensitive to shame. They might just go right back to the during if we try to do too much after teaching.
Sure.
But the before is just about skill building and it's unrelated to a prior challenging moment. And I feel like that's a lot of what your research is talking about when it's saying like, this is the evidence-based way to build emotion regulation skills in kids over time is to really talk and build skills around language and emotion connections in the before.
Yes. Yes. And so instead of saying, remember that last time that we were at the pool and, you lost it because of whatever, you are saying emotions in general work like this, right? So when we're frustrated, we tend to feel this way. And like, what are some things that we can do to make ourselves less frustrated? So, the last time that you were really frustrated in this situation, what could we do to help structure the situation better next time so that you won't feel that way?
Yeah. Do you think that parents like feel like they have skills or other strategies? I mean, we're talking kind of broadly, like I think we all get the idea, like, yeah, it's good to teach your kids about emotions, but I also think kids, especially really sensitive kids who have had many experiences where their emotions just don't feel good to them. And then they do stuff that then people get mad at them about. And this whole area of talking about emotions, talking about feelings for this subset of kids can just be something they really want to avoid. I have a lot of families where like, even in the before moments, their kids just shut down, they tune them out, they feel like they're just not able to tolerate anything about emotions. What would be ways to start that feel maybe 1, 2, 3 steps removed that still are working on these neural connections in the emotion mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really tricky. I think also there are parents who are reluctant to talk about emotions, right?
Because you're like, I don't want to poke the bear when he's calm.
Right. Or they're like not comfortable with their own emotions, right? And so like they come from a place where emotions are bad and dangerous. And, there's all this work on emotion beliefs and sort of how do you even approach the value of emotions in the first place? And so there is this sort of like intergenerational phenomenon where people who have parents who are good at talking about emotions tend to be good at talking about emotions and then have children, who they talk about emotions with and vice versa. So I think on both ends, actually, it's important that people are willing to go there.
Mm.
And not be afraid that emotions are these dangerous things, right? Like our emotions are so adaptive and they evolved for a reason to help us navigate the world. They tell us when something is right and when something is wrong. But yeah, I definitely understand that, particularly in kids who are strongly feeling kids who have maybe gotten in trouble for being strongly feeling kids, they sometimes just want to suppress and not talk about emotions at all. There's probably some like pretty standard gender differences in this as well. You know, we tend to socialize our girls. So both moms and dads talk to girls more about emotions than they do to boys. And, you know, from a very early age, we encourage boys to just suppress emotions, which turns out not to be a super great emotion regulation tool all the time. And so I think finding avenues to have these conversations is key. And I don't know that there's a one size fits all. You know, it could be reflecting on past experiences, but again, like that can be shameful, that can be triggering. It could be like reading books that have characters that experience strong emotions, that sort of normalizes experiencing strong emotions, or using the book as a jumping off point for saying, what do you think that character was feeling? Why did they behave that way? What do you think they could do next time? And then it's actually not personal, but you're engaging in the content in hopefully a compelling way.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm thinking of as we're talking is I think books is really useful. I think that's one of the most like one of the easiest entry points. But I also know there are some kids who that they're like, I don't want to read that. Like, I have kids who are like, they got ADHD diagnosis and their parents want to like read them books about, that. And they're like, I don't want to, or like, or even not so on the nose, but just like books where a kid is having an emotional experience. I do think the more 1, 2, 3 steps removed. So books with animal characters rather than people, or where there are emotional exchanges happening in the book, but the book isn't about that necessarily. So it's just, we can get some space and some distance. Yeah. And like, we titrate, we work our way up. So we start where it's like more peripheral and we expose and expose and expose in that space, and then can slowly bring it to a more direct place where we're starting to introduce a book where like, it's really about an emotion. Explicitly, or there's a resolution that's talking about the emotion more explicitly. And then we could just read that without tying it back to our child's experience at all. And then again, titrate up a little bit more. And maybe we're going to go, if there is a book they like, look for an emotional exchange that happens in that book and then try to make that connection point for them. So we're building their tolerance over time. And one other strategy that comes to mind is play. And I'm curious your thoughts on this because, and I think this is also, there's some gender differences in this too. But I think I see it in boys and girls that when they are playing and they are aggressive in their play, like if they're like, for example, if like, they're smashing some trucks together and they're saying like, it's going to smash and crush you. And, I'm going to like beat you up and bang you. And then parents are like, oh, no. Wait, let's be nice. Let's make the trucks play nicely. Like we interrupt aggression in play that is, and I'm talking about play aggression that a child is working out through play, not I'm playing and all of a sudden I get mad and I'm hitting you, not aggression that breaks through the play, but aggression that truly is being played out inside the frame of play. We tend to interrupt that and shut that down and redirect it a lot. And I wonder if that's actually doing a lot more harm than good.
Yeah. I mean, lots of developmental psychologists think that play is where kids are learning and exploring, right? And so I think if they are engaging in emotional stuff while they are playing in the context of, their fake world, then great. Encourage it. You could even say like, oh, like, why did that one truck smash the other truck? Like, what happened? And you really start to like engage them on causes and consequences. And, how did that other truck feel when it just got hit? And, obviously you have to like feel it out
Right.
and see if they're willing to go there. But
Well, I think I think there's like the middle of the bell curve kids are going to totally tolerate that. Although I'd be mindful of not interrupting the play with these reflective comments in the moment. But those sensitive kids, if you try to do that, you're going to just kind of throw a grenade on the play.
Yeah.
My thought would be in that moment to join in the play, to do the exploring, to do the labeling. So if the child's smashing the cars together, grab a third car and be like, oh, someone got into a smash accident. I got to come and see what's going on. Oh, are you, you seem mad, car, and see if they can engage with you as the characters. So you are, again, you're not popping the bubble. It's the popping the bubble and having these direct conversations about language that a lot of these kids struggle to tolerate. But if you stay inside the bubble of the play, they are in motion, and if you can keep them in that motion, they will likely go with you. And so I think that's also a good place to stay if you have a kid who really doesn't tolerate direct communication about emotions, and you want to build up that kind of core slow exposure to it and increase their tolerance.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting. I remember reading a book on parenting when my kids were young, really young. And it's like, step one, engage in play with them. And I was like, hold up. Do you think I'm not nice to my kids? Like, let's get to the meat of the issue here. I don't want to deal with this play stuff. And then I was like, oh, I'm a psychologist. It took me a long time to be like, oh, I see where you're going with this. Like, this is the venue in which a lot of that attachment occurs, and it's a safe place, and also where you can start to like, this is how kids work this stuff out, right?
Yeah, it's where a lot of the learning takes place.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a really safe place to learn constructs.
Yeah.
But I also think, and I think your point is well taken, like, I don't love playing with my kids. Like, and I don't want parents to feel like, oh, another thing I have to do. I got to play with my kids, and I know, but I don't want to. And I'm like, I also want to give parents permission to say, like, you do not have to play with your kids all the time. Yes, I do think you're going to have to be playful with your kids, but if your goal, I'm just trying to help parents understand that we have a grown-up mind. And when we think about our goal is to teach our kids about like emotion so they can build emotion regulation skills, we go to a grown-up way of learning, and we think of it as very direct. Like, okay, I'm going to teach this lesson and I'm going to help them make sense of it directly. Yeah. And what we have to remember is, if our goal is to teach our kids something, we have to think about how do kids learn? And if they learn more comfortably and more accessibly in play, because play also, it hits a lot of the prerequisites for learning. It turns them on, right? When they're playing, their prefrontal cortex is engaged. Their threat response is off. You can't have a threat response and be playing at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. Yep. So by playing, you are regulating the body and the mind. Yep. You're activating the parts of the brain that are needed for learning. And they're present. They are present. They are fully engaged and mindfully available to the subject matter in their play. So I want parents to understand, like, I'm not saying, oh, you're only a good parent if you play with your kids. I'm saying if your goal is to teach your kids something and you want to be the most effective at achieving that goal, stop thinking about it from the brain of a parent. Absolutely. And figure out how to teach through the play, and you will get your goal met so much more effectively. That's where the before parenting interventions are magic.
Exactly. Yeah, I was going to say you probably get much more bang for your buck in that 5 minutes of play than you do in, trying to drone on about it to them later. So I'm with you. Don't love playing pretend, but if you can play pretend for 5 minutes and actually engage with them, then probably worth it.
Yeah. Use your teaching budget bandwidth.
Yeah.
Because we tend to spend a lot of time trying to teach our kids. And we sort of probably, if we thought about it, probably have some sort of emotional and mental budget for how much time and energy we're going to spend teaching our kids. If you take that time and energy and you turn it into the time that you play with your kids, and you could stop doing all the teaching part,
Exactly.
You're netting even. You're still using up the same amount of energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's probably having a bigger impact.
Yep.
So are there other things like I know some of your research, but are there things we haven't yet kind of discussed that you've kind of discovered in researching emotions that might be interesting? Like that you feel like, oh, if parents knew this piece, that would be a really useful missing piece to a puzzle that a lot of people are curious about or frustrated by.
Yeah. Certainly, well, I think one thing that has become clear to me is that just because we have a sense of what our kid is feeling doesn't mean that they have a sense of what they're feeling. So that was huge. Another piece that is maybe sort of talked about in the validation conversations, but that has been important for me. Again, it's so hard to regulate in the moment. And I think deeply feeling kids, especially, are often getting the message that like, they're too much, it's too much, what they're feeling is wrong. And even just recognizing, like, regardless of what you're feeling and whether it's appropriate in this context or not, you are very distressed by this right now. And like, I can have real empathy for that. And we'll work on it later to make it such that you can have more appropriate responses. And we'll talk about what's appropriate and what's not. But yeah, just like recognizing their distress, I think is huge. The other thing that I don't know if this is interesting to talk about, but something else that we research that's separate from the sort of like conceptual, cognitive labeling and understanding piece is interoception. And so that's like how people understand their internal states and have access to their internal states. And one thing that is interesting to me is that it does seem that there are just people who are completely unaware of anything that's going on inside their body. And that really is such an important prerequisite for being able to understand and label your emotions and regulate them. And, obviously kids are developing that skill. But as adults, there are people who are very good and people who are very poor at understanding internal sensations and sort of detecting them. And so I think also thinking about ways that you can get kids in touch with their bodies and their internal states. And, it doesn't have to be about emotion per se. It could be knowing you're hungry, knowing you're fatigued, engaging in actual physical activity and like knowing what your muscles feel like all of that is such an important precursor for even beginning to know what your emotions are, because that all feeds into your emotions.
That's so true. I feel like, and I see this a lot, and even I fall into this a little bit sometimes, where we get kind of cognitive with our teaching our kids about emotions. And so we go right to words and labeling it and like intellectually engaging with our kids about their emotions. But dropping it down into the body is like, that's step one. Yep. And we skip over that sometimes. So it's like, if your kid is really upset or even just really excited about something, like it could be like anything that's like an intense emotional experience. And we want to go to this sort of thinking place with them.
Yeah.
Oh, you're feeling this, or this happened because of this and this and this. We're pulling them out of their body into their head. We might inadvertently be training them to like, when they have an emotional experience, to go right up to the brain and the mind, like the thinking, cognition. And instead, like, take a beat, feel what it is you feel, what they feel, notice it in your body, that's why I was saying like the reflecting emotions back to kids with the nonverbal stuff. The, oh my God, I know. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like those like visceral, more experiential communications of like, I see you, I can feel it too. Oh my gosh. No, like that is probably helping with interoception awareness.
Yes, absolutely.
Not just helping them go straight to the mind.
Yeah.
I feel like we forget to do that a lot. I think our society has trained all of us to not do that. And we're having to unlearn that now.
Yes, absolutely. And, the less that we sort of go out in the world and do real things and it's all just, mediated by media and so on, probably the more so, right? That
Right.
We just are not going to be embodied to the same extent.
Oh, there's so many interesting things to think about. And I really am grateful for you coming on and sharing these really interesting stories about your research. Thank you so much. If people want to follow your work, read some of your research articles, where can we connect them to you?
Yeah. So all of my work is on my website, KristenLindquist.com. And then you can also find me in my lab at the Ohio State University Psychology Department.
Amazing. And like, what are you working on? Like, what's coming out next?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we are continuing to do all of this stuff across the lifespan. So looking at kids, and actually we have some work in adolescence looking at their interoception. So relationships between like parents' interoceptive abilities and their kids' interoceptive abilities and how those may be related. And then we also have work at the other end of the lifespan where we are understanding how it is that changes to your body and your peripheral nervous system and your brain with age are sort of preceding some of the shifts that we see in emotion in later life. So lots of work on sort of the interplay of biology and the world around us and development and how that all is creating emotions in our health and wellness.
Oh, that's so great. I'm excited to keep reading what you put out. And thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, it was great to chat with you.
If you enjoyed listening to this conversation, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts and your feedback with me by scrolling down to the ratings and review section on your Apple Podcast app or whatever app you're listening on. And let me know what you think of this episode or the show in general. Your support means the absolute world to me. And just a simple tap of 5 stars can make a real impact in how this show gets reached by parents everywhere. So thank you so much for listening, and don't be a stranger.